Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Savannah Bekowski, and I work at the Syracuse University Environmental Finance Center. On behalf of the Environmental Finance Center Network, we have a wonderful webinar lined up for you today, and it's focused on the power of partnership, sharing resources with neighboring systems. We have a great webinar set up, but first there are a few logistics to cover. During the webinar today, everyone will be kept on mute to ensure audio quality. If you have a question, please type it into the GoToWebinar question dialog box at any time throughout the session. We will be holding all questions for a Q&A at the end of the presentations. We will be also posting this presentation as well as a video recording on our website. You can reach that website at the bottom left URL. You will also be receiving a follow-up email that includes links to all of these materials. We do not submit our webinars to licensing agencies for pre-approval of continuing education credits. We do provide certificates of attendance as a courtesy. It can take 1 to 2 weeks to send out the certificates of attendance, and you must attend this entire webinar to receive one. You must have joined this webinar using the unique join link that was emailed to you when you registered. That's how we can count your attendance. We cannot guarantee that this webinar will meet requirements for specific CEU or licensing renewal needs. But if you have any questions about this, you can email us at smallsystems@syr.edu. And here, for a little bit about us, our program provides training and technical assistance to small public water systems in all US states and territories to help local water systems achieve their goals and stay in compliance with the Safe Drinking Water Act. And here you can see the various centers that make up the Environmental Center Network. You can see that we have both university centers and partner organizations spread across this country for this year's programming. We work together to create solutions for difficult how-to-pay environmental protection and improvement issues. And on that note, I would like to introduce our speakers for today's webinar. We have Haley Hajek, a research scientist with the Southwest Environmental Finance Center, and we also have Heather Himmelberger, Director of the Southwest Environmental Finance Center. So welcome, Haley and Heather. And Haley, I pass everything over to you.
Okay, great, Savannah. Can you see my screen?
You're perfect.
Okay, thank you. And this is my bad, I didn't let you know, Savannah, but we have applied for CEU credits for this webinar, and I will reach out to our colleague who has done that and see if they are approved yet, and we'll send a follow-up email letting everybody know the answer to that one. So, okay, I'm sharing my screen. This is a good start. Thank you everybody for attending this webinar. It was originally supposed to be an all-day training here in Albuquerque, but unfortunately, because of world events, we had to change it to a webinar. So I did have you fill out some information in the registration to hopefully make this webinar more specific to your needs, since obviously we can't cover 8 hours worth of material in an hour and a half. To give you kind of an idea of how the next hour and a half is going to go, I'm going to start off with talking about partnership and how it ties in with capacity development, and then move on to the different types of partnerships that are available to you out there and have examples for most of them, specifically focus on the WARN network, and then also go over some basics that you'll need to begin implementing partnership. And then the director of the Southwest Environmental Finance Center, my boss, Heather Himmelberger, will come on for the last 30 minutes to make it a bit more of an interactive webinar and ask you guys some questions and some polls. So please participate in that. I'm sure you'll be ready to after an hour of me talking. But thank you all for attending, and thank you for answering those registration questions. It was very helpful. So to jump right into it, why we're here, partnership. What's the big idea? As many of you probably know on this webinar, small water systems, all water systems, need a high level of technical, managerial, and financial capacity to meet all of their obligations. And there are also many high expectations set by the public. And when you're a very small water system, how are you able to perform and manage all of these responsibilities with the limited resources that you have? And this could be for a number of reasons. It could be because of lack of funding, lack of staff, lack of time. It can be hard to meet all of those regulations, especially when they keep changing. So today we are here to explore how you can save money, hopefully make your job easier and more efficient, and provide better customer service by sharing the burden, sharing your knowledge, asking for help. etc. And before I go into partnership, I want to take a step back and make sure that we're on the same page about capacity development and what I mean by capacity development. So capacity development is a process for water systems to acquire and maintain adequate technical, managerial, and financial capacity. And we usually say TMF. Capacity development is really the backbone for small water systems and really all water systems, and partnership can play an integral role in bolstering these capacities. So TMF capacity enables water systems to have the capacity to consistently provide safe drinking water to the public. And all states have some sort of capacity development office, and they're a great resource. And I'm going to talk about the ones in New Mexico in a little bit. So looking at the three capacities in a little bit more detail, first we have technical. And when I talk about technical capacity, I'm talking about infrastructure. Is it adequate? Is it aging? Do you have the kind of storage and distribution system that you need? What about the technical knowledge? Do you have certified operators? Are they the right certification? And then also we talk about source when we're talking about technical. So quantity, do you have enough? And quality. Are you meeting regulations with your quality? The next we have managerial, and managerial and financial tie in well together, but with managerial, it's staffing. Do you have enough staffing? Do you have a management organization? Do the people working for your organization understand all of the financing and the financial options? Is there an expertise or lack of expertise in the long-term planning of your water system? And then finally, we have financial. And this is, are you planning ahead? Again, closely tied to managerial. Is your revenue sufficient to cover expenses now and into the future? What about your credit worthiness for loans, for example? Are you having adequate water rates? Are they too high? Are they too low? And then your financial management and controls, are they in place? So those three really tie together, and a mix of all three is required to run a successful system, and partnership can improve all three of these capacities. And they're going to be tying into some of the partnership examples that I give you, so I wanted to make sure that we all knew what I was talking about when referring to these capacities. Now, looking at New Mexico specifically, we were lucky enough recently to read the thesis of Tucker Colvin. He is a master's student at the University of New Mexico in the Geography and Environmental Studies department, and he's graduating this year. And his thesis was all about regionalization and partnership in New Mexico, specifically small water systems in New Mexico. So he went around and interviewed many small water systems about what challenges they're facing and how they feel about partnership and regionalization. And so I wanted to draw your attention to the six biggest issues that he found from interviewing small systems in New Mexico. Probably these won't be a surprise, but they are lack of personnel and engaged citizens, deteriorating infrastructure, lack of funds and difficulty receiving outside funding, burdensome and confusing regulations, environmental concerns that could be drought, wildfire, contamination, and then of course, concerns about water rights. Are there enough and are you losing any of them? So I want you to keep these in mind because I'm going to try to tie them into the different examples of partnership and show you how partnership can help solve some of these problems. And so now we're going to move on to the different types of partnerships that exist out there, and I'm going to put them on a spectrum here. So they're going to go all the way from these loose and informal arrangements to more formal defined arrangements. And keep in mind that any type of collaboration can be helpful. So the first one we're going to talk about is this informal information sharing. And if you see on the bottom left there, I have the different capacities, and they're going to light up, they're going to be colorful depending on which capacity is more involved with that type of partnership. So in this case, informal information sharing is much more technical and managerial, because when you're talking about information sharing, you probably don't want to share too much about your finances. So information sharing, that's when systems share information regarding regulations, planning, and infrastructure. And this can be in a very informal setting, like over lunch or over breakfast. And this allows you to work with other systems without contractual obligations. as I'm sure many of you know, a lot of small water systems in New Mexico are actually run by volunteers, learning as they go. So it's extremely valuable if they have somebody that they can call up and ask questions to. Questions like how they can engage their citizens, how do you convince your citizens to go to a meeting? In the registration answers, I saw a lot of, well, nobody's engaged. How do you get your community to come out and show up? We've heard some crazy stories about that, just like bribing people with baked goods. We've even heard of one system that pretended like they were thinking about raising their water rates just to have people come out. But if you have a small system that's really your community is engaged, if you can share that information with other small systems, how you convince people to show up to meetings, that would be extremely helpful. And then it's also helpful to discuss with other small systems where they received funding or how did they navigate some of those complicated regulations. Those were several answers that we also received in our registration. So to give you some examples here, we have in Saipan, which is a US territory, and Heather's actually been there, and it is a small island, mostly resorts and various hotels. And as you can imagine, because it's an island, it doesn't have many resources, and the water system on the island is pretty unreliable. So most of the hotels have their own system. And you can imagine that they're great at running a hotel as a business, but they don't know too much about water systems. So they decided that they would get together over lunch once a month, again, these non-community water systems, and they would rotate around the different facilities and discuss common problems and interests so that they were able to share their resources and also share their knowledge since they were all learning together. Another example we have is in New Mexico, the Donna Ana County Water and Wastewater Alliance, and they started off very similarly. They met monthly over dinner, and they rotated around the different facilities. In this case, they were mostly small community water systems. And again, they discussed common concerns, interests, especially regulatory concerns, but they also invited guest speakers, which I think is a great idea. They invited several guest speakers from different disciplines so they get the kind of expertise that they were lacking as small individual systems. And eventually this continued, and over many years, they were actually able to form a utility authority. Okay, the next example is a bit more formal. We have equipment sharing. And this is where systems share equipment, so each one does not have to buy, own, rent all the equipment that they need. And for example, this would be really useful for leak detection equipment or a backhoe, especially mapping or survey equipment, considering that you're not going to need that mapping equipment very frequently. If you could share it with several other systems, that would share the cost, and it's unlikely that you would need the equipment at the same time. Some examples here. We have in Montana and Utah, Great Falls is a city of about 58,000 and Helena is about 32,000. These are actually fairly large cities for Montana, but these two systems provide equipment and personnel to help tap water lines for smaller nearby systems. So this means that the larger utilities get to bill for the employee time, the travel, the use of equipment, and then smaller systems benefit from the personnel and the expertise. And then same thing with this town in Utah. It's the largest water system in the area, and it provides assistance to about 30 smaller utilities nearby with all sorts of things, lending parts, equipment, supplies, and it's even taken a step further and established an organization to train water operators. So these examples show you that the smaller system is benefiting because they're getting the technical help and they're getting to use the equipment that they probably couldn't afford to buy. But the larger system is also benefiting because it's getting that extra revenue from smaller systems. Okay, the next one we have here is buying consortium. This is where systems work together to buy equipment, chemicals, or supplies. In this case, think economy of scales. So systems can save in cost by buying in bulk. That could be testing supplies, office supplies, chemicals, just get creative. And some water systems do this informally and some do it more formally by forming councils or consortiums to negotiate contracts together and purchase in bulk. And the example that I have here are these systems in Maine, and they have formed the Southern Maine Regional Water Council. And this is their mission statement, and I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but I want to point out the last sentence here, which says, combined, these 7 utilities serve approximately 300,000 people in 23 communities, or 25% of Maine's population. So that means they have pretty big influence if they're serving 25% of Maine's population. And what they decided to do is, before Warren, they created a mutual aid agreement several years ago. And the founding entities decided it should be member-based, meaning that they do pay a small fee, maybe $100 a year, just to make sure that you're committed. And they have a purchasing group that's led by a chairperson who is appointed by the council's board, and the council's board has a member of each system represented, and the chairperson is in charge of all of the bids and what they're going to bid on. The great thing about this is each bid is elective, so if you don't need a certain type of supply, you absolutely do not have to bid. And they've found that these bulk purchasing of chemicals has resulted in significant savings. They've also taken it a step further and done this with tank maintenance contracting. It's also provided significant savings over individual RFPs. So they don't just save money with this, but they also gain product knowledge and purchasing expertise. And it also adds great political influence for the utilities, because I mentioned these 7 members, they represent a fourth of Maine's population and actually half of the state's public water consumers. Or customers, excuse me. So as you can imagine, people want their business and they're willing to do it for a good price. Okay, the next we have the mutual aid and emergency assistance. And this is one that was brought up several times in the registration. So I want to go into a little bit more detail. And we're going to talk about Warren here, but it's a contract. This is where systems assist each other during an emergency or a time of need. A mutual aid agreement is a written agreement, in this case between water systems, and it agrees to assist by helping with personnel, equipment, and expertise in a very specific manner. So it is a contract. You've made a commitment, a legally binding commitment to your neighbor. And this is where Warren comes in, and each state has a WARN, and WARN stands for Water Wastewater Agency Response Network. And it's a mutual aid and assistance network that provides water and wastewater utilities with the means to obtain help in many forms of personnel, equipment, materials, etc., quickly from utilities to restore critical operations impacted during an emergency. So the benefits of WARN range widely, but increased access to resources, information exchanges among entities, expedited aid and equipment arrival. And so I'm going to go a little bit more in depth and describe some features to you. So membership is open to all water systems, regardless of ownership, which is great. And this is key. No member system is obligated to send resources if they decide not to for any reason. So if you feel like you have the resources at that time when WARN is activated, that's great. Send those resources, send those personnel to be helpful, and think of it as paying it forward, because then when you have an emergency, if you've helped in the past, it's much more likely people are going to be willing to come out and help you when you need it. And what's great about WARN too is it's all over the state. So if you think about it, sometimes you think I can only partner with systems that are my neighbors. But that's not the case, because if you have an emergency, for example, maybe there's a forest fire, it's likely that your direct neighbors are also going to be impacted by that emergency. And so it'd be great if people across the state could send resources or help for you. Systems are able to be part of mutual aid and assistance agreements, other ones, not just WARN, so it's not limiting to you. And then this one might be a little bit more intuitive, but obviously each additional member enhances the probability of a successful response to an emergency. So the more people that join WARN, the more systems that join WARN, the more successful it's going to be. And again, existing WARNs have found that small water systems are typically best prepared to respond to other small water systems requests, since they are more familiar with the equipment used. And WARN is a legal agreement, so keep that in mind. Each WARN enters into a mutual aid and assistance agreement that best meets the member needs. And this agreement clarifies liability, reimbursement, response procedures, and joint planning efforts, so you know exactly what you're getting into. And now I'm going to ask Savannah if you can play a short 3-minute video to summarize WARN for us.
Of course. Here we go.
Once, water and wastewater agency response networks are interstate networks of programs across the country. Most have been successful in responding to a wide variety of incidents, ranging from main breaks, water shortages, to earthquakes and other disasters. Most recent cases with more than 25 major activations today, WARN's nationwide facilitating the sharing of equipment and skilled personnel, reducing response time, and saving utilities beyond for emergencies. The Salmonella outbreak in Colorado in March and April 2008 was the largest WARN activation that state has ever seen. Once the fleet was there called within hours, Colorado was activated and couldn't work Colorado. Exercising a more operational plan and help streamline response efforts. Another key element to a successful communication and coordination with response partners. Relationships and extensive foundation, members across the United States are prepared to respond to these wide range of concerns. Find out prepared to your community and learn more about WARN by visiting epa.gov/mutual aid for national report.
All right. My sincere apologies. My control panel seems to be frozen. Haley, if you can hear me, please take presenter mode back.
I can hear you. Let's see. Okay, I think I have it. Can you see my screen, Savannah?
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, great, no problem. Okay, I apologize if anyone had any feedback with that video. We were all on mute and we had practice, but technical difficulties do arise, so I hope it wasn't too bad. So this, if we're looking at the New Mexico WARN, and Heather's going to ask you guys if you're a member and what you think of WARN in a little bit, but this is what the legal mutual aid agreement looks like for the New Mexico WARN. This can be found on the New Mexico WARN website, but you can download it and read it. I would highly recommend you have a lawyer look at it, but once you sign that and send it in, then you can be part of the network. It's pretty much as easy as that. So this is what the website looks like, and this is where you're going to find that mutual aid agreement. And the text here is basically what I just told you. the different aspects of WARN. But if you look at the bottom of the screen here where it says join the NM WARN, that's where you're going to be able to download that agreement, and also where you're going to be able to contact who you need to contact to join the WARN. And it is associated with the Rural Water website, and it was created in 2008. So from the website, I was able to pull up these members. I don't know how recently this was updated, so there could be other members, hopefully many more members that are already part of WARN. But as you can see from the list here, you have utilities of various size. You have Albuquerque, Bernalillo, but you also have City of Los Lunas and a lot of other smaller utilities. And you also have tribal utilities. You see the Pueblo of San Felipe there. So it's really open to everyone, and I highly, highly recommend joining. Okay, moving on from WARN, we have our emergency or non-emergency interconnect, and this is definitely a much more formal partnership. And this is where systems have a physical connection that is only used during emergencies. So think about potentially a major line break. For these interconnects, you need to have very, very clear rules of what does and does not allow an interconnect to be open. Interconnects are something that California has started to require due to the prevalence of earthquakes, but obviously New Mexico is much more spread out, and it might just be a partnership option that is not an option for you. You also need to consider and be conscious of the water chemistry issues that can be caused by an interconnect. For this example, we go to South Dakota. So Aurora, South Dakota is a small town with only a population of 500 and about 250 connections. It is about 5 miles from a larger town, Brookings, which has 22,000 a population of 22,000. And so Aurora was consistently violating the MCL, the maximum contaminant level for nitrate. They also, on top of that, didn't have a plant operator with adequate certification, and they lacked financial resources, etc. So a lot of issues that small systems are having. So Aurora and Brookings got together and they talked, and they decided that they were going to share the cost of a transmission pipeline to interconnect the systems. And really the goal here was Aurora customers, yes, they had to pay slightly more for their water, but a lot less than if they had to install a nitrate treatment system. Again, you see a bigger system winning because they're getting a little bit extra revenue, and the smaller system is winning because they have safe drinking water and they don't have to worry about adequate certification or their nitrate levels anymore. Okay, here we have the next one is operational collaboration, and I would always tend to go on the more formal side of this, but some people do have very formal agreements, and this is where systems share an operator or contract with the same operator or operation companies. We've heard over and over again how smaller systems struggle to access the required workforce. They might cost more, it might be harder to recruit, it might be harder to convince somebody to stay. A lot of small systems aren't able to pay an operator to work full-time. Usually an operator would like full-time work. So if you have several small systems that are close together, sharing an operator would be ideal. We know of one small system in New Mexico where their operator only works about 40 hours a month. And I'm sure he would appreciate if he could work for other small systems nearby and fill in that extra time. When Tucker talked, again, that grad student talked to other small systems in New Mexico, lack of personnel came up over and over again. I would highly recommend reaching out to the high school. Water system jobs are not something that most people know about. And so think long-term, start in high school, go talk to students about this type of work, think about creating internships or even job shadowing. Really, if you're a small system, you just need one operator. So if you can convince one person graduating high school that this is a career path that would be something they're interested in, it could really benefit the system for a long time to come. Again, these can be very formal collaborations, so that would be collaborating with water sampling, and for a fee, there are contracted operators that can conduct back tease sampling, chlorine residual sample or testing, for example. And then less formal type of operational collaboration is if, as we know in New Mexico, labs are pretty far away, and driving to those labs could take hours. So if you can coordinate with systems nearby and have all of your samples transported at once with just one person, that could save you some time and money. And our example here is in Iowa. We have one city, Des Moines, and a much smaller town, Panora. And Panora had trouble retaining staff. It only serves about 1,175 customers, and it's about 45 miles away from Des Moines. And so they got together with Des Moines, and they signed an MOU, which is a memorandum of understanding, and it would allow Des Moines to monitor the treatment plant remotely, which essentially limited the need for an on-site operator to 2.5 hours per day. Again, why each side is winning: the larger utility gets extra revenue, while the smaller utility gets access to operators that they're having trouble recruiting. And you'll see this theme over and over again. Okay, now we have interlocal agreement, and this is actually one that we don't often talk about in our partnership trainings, but it was mentioned in the registration, so I did want to touch on it. And instead of giving you an example about an interlocal agreement, I'm instead going to go over some resources that you can dive into to get some more information. So an interlocal agreement is an agreement to buy or sell water services to one another. And as Savannah mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, we are part of a larger network. And so our sister center at UNC focuses on crafting interlocal agreements, and they specifically focus on the legal side. So they have a lawyer on staff that can be very helpful, and they've created these two resources that you can easily download as PDFs. The first is crafting interlocal water and wastewater agreements. The second is consolidation of water and wastewater systems, options and considerations. And you can easily go download them, or if you want to email me, I can send you the PDF, but it goes over the importance of, within an interlocal agreement, removing ambiguity, defining service area boundaries, thresholds, meter maintenance, and ownership responsibilities. So it goes in depth, but it's not all legal jargon, which is great. So it's pretty easy to understand. And I think this is a great time too to plug that we do technical assistance over the phone for 20 hours for free. So if you are seriously interested in interlocal agreements, I would look these over, and then we can easily get you a TA with UNC where they can go more in depth about the interlocal agreements. Along those same lines, just like we have this webinar, we offer webinars usually around the country, again, for free. And there was one in earlier in April, about regionalization and partnership as well, but this one really focused instead on the legal side. So if you're interested on the legal side of partnership and also interlocal agreements, I highly recommend going to our EFCN network website and looking at this webinar. It's on YouTube now. And then something that Heather's also going to go more in depth about, but since we're on the topic of webinars, we did do a COVID-19 webinar. I bring this up because in the registration, there were some questions about COVID-19, and it didn't really fit into the partnership I was going to talk about, so I wanted to show you these resources. There was a webinar in early April, and there's also going to be a webinar May 21st that you can sign up for, both free. So if you're interested in how COVID-19 is affecting the workforce and also water rates, please check out those webinars. Okay, the next one we have here is financial collaboration, and it can run the spectrum. Again, I'm a bit more conservative, and I always think that you should be on the more formal side, especially when we're talking about financial collaboration, but there are many different types, and how formal or not formal you make it is really your choice. As we know, for small systems, it's really hard to access capital, especially when you're serving systems of less than 500 people, and it was one of the top issues brought up with when Tucker went out and interviewed small systems, money and aging infrastructure. So there are several ways that you can cut down on your costs and pull your resources to help each other through partnership. And that could be combined billing structure, coming together to build a new well, sharing a manager, combining billing departments, especially for small systems, sharing a bookkeeper. So in New Mexico, there are several small systems in southern New Mexico that do this. They share an accounting firm that can then designate staff to these systems. And normally this would cost a lot more if you were just one system, but because they banded together and came to this firm, they got a discount. Okay, the next one here is managerial collaboration. Pretty intuitive. This is where systems share management structure, but systems are not interconnected. This might make the most sense if you are a water and wastewater division in the same town, but it's also great for small towns that are close together if one system is being managed by somebody who knows what they're doing, if they can either help out the volunteer managers of the other systems or take over as management for the other systems and be paid when maybe they're volunteer, that would be helpful. But it's up to you, and it can be as formal or informal as you want. The next, which I'm going to go more in depth about because it's a New Mexico example, is this regional entity. And this is an extremely formal process, and it also takes a long time. So regional entity is where systems form a regional entity either as a separate option or the only option, but it's important that all of them have a role on the board. And this process will look pretty different depending on which state you're in. But in New Mexico, a lot of systems in southern New Mexico were able to form an entity, of an authority called the Lower Rio Grande Public Water Works Authority. And this started way back several years ago, I believe in early 2005, again, with just very informal meetings, 5 systems. They met regularly so that they could build relationships, they could build trust, and they discussed opportunities to work together. And what they found through these discussions is that their operations, maintenance, and capital improvement costs were unsustainable, as I'm sure many people can relate to. And so after this first year, 4 of those 5 systems decided that they had enough in common that they wanted to sign an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, to formalize their intent to work together. And some of the critical drivers behind that partnership or that need to collaborate were they were making similar purchases. 2 of the 4 systems faced national primary drinking water regulation compliance issues. And then they also needed help meeting reporting and audit requirements. So they also realized that they needed to increase their number of connections and streamline all these duplicated efforts. So all these critical drivers from these informal meetings culminated in the need to merge and become one regional entity. It's not easy to do that. So the authority had to be able to function as a legal structure with the ability to facilitate a merger of the founding associations. All of that meant that they needed the state legislation to be revised. To do that, they partnered with a lot of key stakeholders, state partners, private associations and groups, funding agencies, other organizations like us to help them get to that point. But in 2009, about 4 years after they started these conversations, New Mexico passed House Bill 185, which created the authority, and it gave them the legal standing to discuss mergers with agencies. It also gave them a federal tax ID number. And then by 2012, the authority had already grown by adding 3 additional systems. So it was a big difference for all of those systems. There weren't as much, there wasn't any turnover in employees. They all had benefits, which they did not have before. Water operators could finally take vacations, and they also finally had some standardized customer policies and rates. The end result, so what it looks like now after several years, it serves 16 communities in 3 service areas and covers over 100 square miles. And the authority now has 2 wastewater collection systems. 1 wastewater treatment facilities, has 10 water systems, and serves approximately 5,000 drinking water connections, 500 wastewater connections, and can now employ 31 people. So again, remember this started from very informal talks of just seeing what issues they were both or all experiencing and how they could benefit one another. So the community has benefited and the utility has benefited. The utility has a larger pool of resources. They have improved working conditions. they've increased cost efficiency, and they have better planning abilities. And then the community now has lower water rates. They also have more reliable access to safe drinking water, and they have an increased resiliency to customer water demands. So it was a great success, even though it took a lot of work. Okay, this is the last type of partnership we're going to talk about today. And this is where systems dissolve into a neighboring entity. So the system loses independence and only one utility remains. This is very rare and usually only happens out of necessity. And the example I'm going to use here is a small town in North Dakota. It served only about 40 homes and businesses, and it operated its own treatment plant for its 100 residences. It used to treat its own water, but just like many small water systems, the plant needed major capital improvements, and with only 100 residents, finding the financial means to do so didn't seem very likely. So it was actually cheaper to connect with a neighboring community and have that water piped in instead. So again, this is a last resort. Don't think that partnerships will lead to this by any means, but I just wanted to show it to you as an option. So now that we have gone over all of the different types of partnerships, I wanted to share with you some of the common concerns that we often hear from systems when we go through the partnerships. Desire for autonomy, mistrust of other systems, lack of knowledge of other systems, lack of knowledge of the options, and then no outside independent force to get collaboration started. All of these are absolutely valid, but I think that we can address most of them. So I hope that lack of knowledge of options, I hope you can cross that off your list now that we've gone through various types of partnerships. The mistrust of other systems and the lack of knowledge of other systems, I think, goes hand in hand. If you can't trust somebody, you're not going to tell them about your system, and vice versa. And that's where the informal information sharing really comes in handy. If you can just start talking or calling or meeting over breakfast or lunch and really getting to know the other system, that's how you build trust. And then they're going to be more willing to share the information about their system and maybe what they need. And if you can do the same, you can see if there's room for partnership there. No outside independent force to get collaboration going. This is something where you should absolutely reach out to the state, and I'm going to be talking about state resources if you're genuinely interested in partnership. And then you can also reach out to other organizations just like ours to help get some partnerships and collaboration going, so you don't have to do it by yourself. And then desire for autonomy, this one you kind of have to solve by yourself. You have to believe in the process and trust that who you're partnering with has their best interest and your best interest at heart. If you want to be completely on your own, then you're not going to be partnering with anybody. Now, those were the most common concerns about collaboration that we've heard from around the country. Within New Mexico, Tucker asked about specific concerns about collaboration, and the list is actually pretty similar, just different verbiage. So sovereignty, exploitation, trust, finances, practicality, loss of water rights. Those are the main concerns about collaboration in New Mexico. We've kind of talked about trust, we've talked about exploitation. Practicality, I think that one's bigger for New Mexico because we're such a large state. So you're not necessarily going to have an interconnect with somebody because you might be too far away. So I do think that's a pretty valid concern. But again, you don't have to be next to somebody to partner with them. It would just be a different type of partnership. Loss of water rights, again, nobody's forcing you into these partnerships. So whatever kind of agreement you come to, make sure it's a legally binding agreement and that water rights are discussed so you don't have any concern about them. Nobody's forcing you to do these agreements so that nobody's forcing you to give up water rights. You know, they're very important in New Mexico. And also take any opportunity that you can to network. So what we love about this training in person is we force you guys to talk to each other and really get to know each other, because sometimes it's hard to meet other water operators unless you're going to these trainings. But since water operators do have to go to these trainings, and hopefully board members will as well, and maybe even some mayors, always take that opportunity to talk to the person next to you, maybe go to lunch with them and see if there's room for partnership there. That's the best way to start. So in the registration, I had you guys fill out what types of partnership you might be interested in. So if you look on the vertical axis here, we have number of votes. And then on the horizontal axis, we have the different types of potential partnerships and which ones would you be interested in. And as you can see, emergencies and natural disasters, as well as providing a certified operator, were the top choices. Hopefully, now that you know of WARN, if you didn't before, you'll consider joining. And then providing a certified operator. Again, I would highly recommend that you reach out to schools. Our network also provides TAs for workforce, and they do workforce webinars as well if you're interested. And also think about talking to neighboring systems who may have an operator already who's not working full time. But these are the common interests, it seems, in New Mexico for partnership, and Heather's also going to be talking and getting you guys to participate a bit about partnerships that already exist. And so maybe you can share some insight into these different types of partnerships that you have already. So here are the resources that I was mentioning earlier in the webinar. This is the New Mexico Environment Department Drinking Water Bureau. I highly recommend going to this website, their community, and looking at their community services program. It provides free assistance to public water systems to improve all of the capacities that we talked about earlier through many services, and this would include compliance with state agencies, development of a budget, 5-year fiscal plan, etc. But also importantly for this webinar, facilitation of regional coordination with other systems. So they can help you talk about partnership, and obviously they've been around the state and they might know of other systems that are also interested in partnership, and if you agree and other systems agree that you'd be open to talking to one another, they can help you facilitate that. So a great resource I'd recommend going to. And then the New Mexico Drinking Water Revolving Fund, not necessarily specifically a resource for partnership, but the fund helps fund projects that protect drinking water quality and public health. And if you look at the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund fiscal year 2020 intended use plan, which I'm sure we've all looked at thoroughly, but it gives systems extra priority points if they're trying to consolidate in some way. And more points are given to physically connecting systems, but there are also a few points given for plans to share resources. So something to keep in mind that the state is actively prioritizing and encouraging partnerships, which is great to have that kind of backing. And so it can help you get funding if you can show that you're partnering in some way. Okay, so taking a step back, let's look at the big pictures. We've talked about the types of partnership, we've talked about your concerns, we've talked about some resources. What are the benefits? What's the big picture? Well, it benefits systems, states, and customers. If you're a systems, partnership can benefit you by economies of scale, bulk purchasing. It can give you some long-term savings. It can improve your customer service. It can help you plan for future operations. And of course, it increases your ability to meet capacities. On the state level, why partnership is great, it can improve compliance, it can have the potential to reduce the number of systems regulated, and it can also save some of the state's resources. And then on the customer side, you have hopefully improved water quality, you have the option of reduced long-term costs, potentially lower water bills, and also more importantly, increased reliability. So it's winning on several fronts, and there are reasons for the system, the state, and the customer to be interested in partnership. Wrapping everything up, I want to talk about some elements of success that you can do right now before going out and looking for partnerships that can help you be an ideal partner. The first would be goals. So it's important to have a very thorough understanding of what you want to get out of a partnership before you approach a partner. So an organization must have an agreement from the leadership down regarding the goals. I would get together internally and discuss your system goals. So from the operator to community members to the board to management, who's ever going to be involved, it's great if everyone can get together and talk about goals. and the goals for each party must be clearly articulated to one another. So once you have those goals, make sure that you can articulate them to a system that you want to partner with. Of course, it's great if you can make those goals measurable, but any type of goal setting can be helpful. The next related to goals is don't just think in the short term, also think in the long term. So, okay, what are your short-term goals, but what are your long-term goals as well? And partnership might help with both, but it might be different types of partnership. So keep that in mind. The next are, what are your obligations? So if you're entering into a partnership, what would you like your obligations to be? What will you be required to do in the future, not just now? And make sure that you have the resources to meet those obligations. Again, make it very clear so that both parties can understand what they're getting into. Halfway through a partnership, you don't want to be the one who's reneging on your obligations. So make them very clear. Legal agreements can definitely help with that. And then through all of this, communication is key at all levels, between parties, between managers and operators, between you and the community. The easiest way to start is always with informal conversations with potential partnership stakeholders to build that trust, but then you need communication throughout all layers of the partnership to make it successful and to continue to build that trust, which, as remember from previous slides, trust is a big concern with partnership and collaboration, and communication can help with that. Also consider the option of an outside or neutral facilitator. They can be great because they're non-judgmental, they don't take sides, they can focus more on the process. It's a guide, and this can be the state, it can be other organizations like us that can help, that don't really have any skin in the game, but just want to see both sides succeed and have a great partnership. So if you feel like there's some mistrust or you don't even know where to start, it's great to have an outside neutral facilitator come in and maybe help get the partnership off the ground. And then the whole point of partnership is winning. So every party benefits in some way, either now or later. Now, this doesn't mean that everyone wins equally. Some are going to win more than others, but the point is that everyone is winning. And goals are a great way to benchmark if you are winning. So a lot of the examples that I gave were about a larger water utility receiving more money, but also a small water utility receiving the technical and the personnel expertise that they needed. These are different types of benefits, and maybe you could consider one as winning more than the other, but the point is that everyone is benefiting. And so before I end the presentation on my end, I also want to mention one other resource within the registration. A lot of people talked about their issue of communicating with the community or with board members and getting them to understand. I want you to keep in mind that a lot of people do not understand the intricacies of water systems and everything that it takes to run them. And so if you need help communicating everything that you do to your community or to your board to help them see your point of view and to get you more help, we also have EFC West does communication webinars and also TA that can walk you through how to explain your very complicated job to somebody who doesn't necessarily understand the water system. And so again, please reach out to me and I'm happy to connect you with those TA providers that can help you with communication like that. And so with that, I'm going to hand it off to Heather, and we're going to have a more interactive session now.
Okay, can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
Okay. Oops, whoops. I'm doing the wrong thing here. Okay. All right, I'm trying to just see what's sharing here because my computer's now freaking out. What exactly are you seeing? Are you seeing my screen in presenter?
No,
full-
we are not seeing your presentation. If you wanted to go to that sharing section on your control panel and
Try
it's
this
a
again.
drop down box.
Okay.
Perfect.
All right. Yeah, technology is always good until it doesn't work for you. So I apologize for that. It's always a little questionable if it's going to work the way you want it to or not. So again, I apologize for that. So we've talked a lot about just cooperation options in general. And now I wanted to get into some chance for you guys to kind of participate a little bit. I know that because there's so many people, we can't unmute everybody and just have you talk, but we have polls and we have the question box that we can use to get some answers. So with that, we'll start with a poll question. Have you thought about some type of collaboration? So your options here are no, you really haven't been thinking about it. Yes, but you're not really sure what the options are. Yes, you have an idea of what you want, but you haven't done it yet. Yes, you're in the process of collaborating, or yes, you're in some type of collaboration already. So, excuse me. So go ahead and put in your answers for that.
Perfect. And we'll leave this poll open for a few more moments. And we'll get ready to close this poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And so, Heather, it looks like the majority of attendees that responded at 42% have answered yes. They have an idea of what they want, but have not done it yet. 33% answered with yes, but they are not sure what the options are. 8% answered yes, we are already in some type of collaboration, and 17% answered no.
Well, that's great information because it looks like, more than half of us, a big chunk of us, about 75%-ish, are really looking at some kind of collaboration and maybe just want a little bit of help to get whatever kind of collaboration you would like going, or, some information about what the options are, some, some of which we talked about today. All right, so what I'd like you to do, if you've done some type of collaboration, so there were a few of you that are indicating that you've done some type of collaboration. Please describe it in the question box. We also have the chat box, but that's a little bit harder to use. So if you can just use the question box and type a little bit about it, you'll have the rest of my time to type that in because we'll wait till we get to the end of the section and maybe look at what you've put in there. But it would really be interesting for you to kind of jot down a few things about the kind of collaboration, any issues, any positives, just share a little bit about what happened. And again, if you have a collaboration, if you can write that up in the question box. In the meantime, we'll move on. And I wanted to take a moment to kind of describe some types of collaboration that could be especially useful right now at this time of a pandemic. So it's always useful to collaborate with your neighbors, no matter what time, what times are like. It can be useful to find ways to collaborate with your neighbors and finding a way that best fits your needs. So there's no particular type of collaboration that you would have to do at any particular time. But I wanted to pull up a few kinds of collaboration that are especially helpful now as we're facing this pandemic. So as Haley talked a lot about these WARN networks, the WARN network was really established for this very kind of thing. When things are kind of crazy, there's something happening, there's some kind of event that's affected water utilities, that's exactly what a WARN network was set up to do. And so this, if you've never thought of joining before, now is the time to really think about it because, as Haley mentioned, there's no downside to joining. It's not going to obligate you to anything. So even if you sign up and say a neighboring utility needs your help, if you're not in a position to help at that time, like maybe your operator is really busy and you know, can't take anything else on, or you don't have any supplies you can offer or whatever, you're not obligated to have to do that. So keep that in mind, that it is just there to help you, and hopefully you can help others when the time comes, but you're not obligated to use the WARN if you're in trouble or help if somebody else is in trouble. So we have a poll question about the WARN. So I wanted to see, for the folks who are on the phone today, if you're actually a member of the WARN. So your choices here are: you've never heard of the WARN before today, no, you're not a member, you're thinking about joining but you didn't get around to it yet, or yes, you are a member. So if you could go ahead and take that poll, that would be great.
We'll leave this poll open for just a few more moments. I'm getting ready to close the poll in 3, 2, 1. And so Heather, it looks like 67% of attendees answered that they are not a member. 27% have never heard of WARN, and 7% are current members.
Okay, so we have a little interactive question here. And the question is, or the questions I'd like you to respond to, and again, if you could just write your answer into the question box. If you're not a member of the WARN, and it looks like most of you are not, there were just a couple people that are already a member, you know, what's the reason that you resisted joining? Is there some concern that you have? So it'd be nice to just get some responses of why you haven't joined, and we will keep all of your responses anonymous. You don't have to worry about anything like that. We just were curious of why people were not members. And if you are a member, for those couple of you who are members, what prompted you to join? Have you ever participated in asking, by asking for help or offering help? So has anybody used it for anything? So go ahead and write in. So take a couple of moments here and write something in. So we have a couple of responses coming in now. And I'm sorry, I'm trying to figure out my technology again, that it cuts off my answers, and I'm trying to figure out how you can see the whole thing. Ah, crap. So one was not a member, just didn't feel it was necessary at this time. Not a member of WARN, considering asking their board if they should join. So again, if you haven't thought about it, just think about it, because it might be something that could be helpful to you. Somebody indicated they just recently learned of WARN. So again, if you're, you know, considering it, now really is the time to really think about it. We don't know where this pandemic is going to go. We don't know what's going to happen over the next, you know, several months. So it's something to consider, because it's better to do it now than wait until some really bad thing happens to you and you need it then. It's kind of better to be ahead of the game. There's one person said they were original member, they haven't needed to use it yet. Somebody else is the first time they've heard of it, but they'll bring it up to their supervisor. And again, it was actually came out of the Hurricane Katrina and Rita days, where water utilities really needed to help each other. That was a very, very bad time for water utilities in Texas and Louisiana, and they needed a lot of help. And what we discovered is that there weren't always the proper legislative or legal things in place. You know, how was, if somebody got hurt on the job, how would that be handled? How would, you know, any kind of legal wranglings between different agencies, how could that be handled? So the WARN was created to kind of address all that on the front end, so you didn't have to worry about it in an emergency. So again, if you haven't thought about it, now is sort of a time to think about it and to do it before you need it, rather than you getting to a really bad situation and then need it then. So let's move on to some other situations. Just sharing with your neighbors in general. So thinking of that as sort of just an informal way to collaborate with others, and you can work with those systems that are nearby you in an informal way. You can have it a little bit more formal if you want, but it can be a really informal situation. So do you communicate with the utilities near you? So we have a poll question about that. So what you can say here is, no, I don't really know which ones are near me. So you might not be communicating with the utilities around you because you don't know who that is. No, you really hadn't thought about it. You have in the past, but you haven't really been doing it recently. Yes, once in a while you work with utilities, and yes, frequently. So there's a couple of different choices that you have there. So go ahead and choose the option that best works for you.
Great, and we'll leave this poll open for a few more moments. And we'll get ready to close in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And now, Heather, can you see these results?
Yes. So what we have is most of our folks, yes, once in a while have been communicating with their utility, so about 46%. And then another 31% have in the past, but nothing recently. So that's the vast majority of us, kind of a little bit going on, but not a lot. So I wanted to give you another chance to kind of communicate through the question box. And again, we'll keep this completely anonymous, so you don't have to worry about, we're not going to use anybody's name. But if you communicate with your neighbors, do you have any type of agreement with them to help out? Do you have a formal agreement, informal agreement? If no agreement is there between the two of you, what kinds of things do you work with each other on? Like, do you share just, you know, you had a question about something, you call them up to get an answer? You know, what kinds of things might you do with your neighbors? In what ways do you help each other out? So we had one response that they didn't really know which systems were nearby. Another one said they don't really have an agreement, but they do an annual emergency response training. That's really cool. They have a right-of-way sharing agreement with their neighbors. Another one that didn't have any communication with their neighbors. So that's a really interesting answer, the one about doing the annual emergency response training. That's a great way to communicate with your neighbors, because in an emergency situation, oftentimes you'll have a regional type emergency where maybe it's a fire or a flood, and it's really good to have coordinated responses between, you know, the local entities who are in the same area. Or you may just have a situation where your utility is hurt by some kind of event, a fire or vandalism, or who knows, it could be anything. And it's great to know who's around you to do that emergency response. So that's a really good answer. And then the right-of-way sharing agreement is nice because that allows you to work in each of your areas. That's good. This one has a shared water operator, but he left and a new one refused to be shared. So unfortunately, it sounded like at one time they had a shared water operator, but now they're having trouble with that sharing of an operator. Another one, shared problem solving, answers questions, dealing with suppliers, and NMED. I'm sorry, I can't. Savannah, can you read the whole questions, because mine gets cut off. I'm not sure how to. So on the one we share problem solving, answer questions, dealing with suppliers. Do you know what the rest of the answer is?
Yep, so dealing with suppliers and the New Mexico Environmental Department.
Okay. And then the next one, informal, friends or operators in the other local systems, and we borrow equipment, and the rest of that response.
And knowledge from each other.
That's great. Fantastic. So really good ways of collaborating with your neighbor. I wanted to give a few tips regarding collaboration with your neighbors that, especially in this time of pandemic, things that you might want to think of if you're looking at collaborating with your neighbors, or you already do, and maybe just some tips of some other ways you can think about this. If you don't already have any kind of maps of your system, where your basic water lines are, where your wells are, where your tanks are, if you don't have anything like that, now is a really good time to create something like that. Because if somebody needed to come into your system in an emergency, like let's say your operator gets sick or somehow is incapacitated, and you need somebody right away to come in and help, it would really, really help them if they knew where your assets were. So where's your tank, where's your well, where's your major pipelines, your valves to shut off pipes that are leaking, that type of thing. So if you have a map, it can really help you. Now, sometimes there's super formal maps. It does not have to be that. It can be a hand-drawn map. You can start with something, a base map you can print out for free offline. You can draw on it. So it doesn't have to be super, super formal. But if you don't have a map, really, really consider getting one. If you do have a map, think about where that map is located. Is it somewhere where another operator, if they're coming in at a moment's notice, would be able to find it? So leave instructions. If it's on the computer, how would you access it? What's the password you need to get in? Or print it off so that they would have it and list where that is. Similarly, if you have an operation and maintenance guide for what's the basic things that you have to do in your system, that could be super helpful, especially like the basic things, like the most important things. And here's how to turn this on, here's how to turn this off, here's where the switch is. If you've not already done an OMM guide, now is the time to do it, because if somebody has to come in, again, you want to give them the best information. If you have some kind of inventory of your assets, that can be super helpful. And then emergency contacts. So again, if somebody's going to come in to help in your utility, and let's say, they're just thrown into the situation and the operator, for whatever reason, or maybe others who know about the system can't help right then. If you have emergency contacts, that can be super helpful. Just what's the phone tree, who are the police, the fire, all those different folks that you might need to contact in an emergency. Who's your lab? Who has things like chlorination and that sort of stuff, so that you're really making sure that whoever has to come in and take care of your system is able to do that. So another way that people sometimes collaborate, and they don't really think about it as collaboration, is contract operators. So if you're using a contract operator, it's highly likely somebody else is. So a contract operator is actually a form of collaboration, even though you may not know who the other systems are that the contract operator works for. You're collaborating through sharing an operator. So one question I have for you guys is, if you have a contract operator, do you have a written agreement with that person or organization? So you can choose here. No, you just have a verbal. I'm sorry, the question is, if you have a contract operator, do you have a written agreement with that person or organization? Answer is no, just verbal or handshake agreement. No, we hadn't really thought about it. Yes, but it's very simplistic. Yes, it is reasonably detailed. And yes, it is very detailed. So take a moment and just answer that question about contract operators.
And we'll leave this poll open for a few more moments. And getting ready to close this poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Okay, so it looks like most people hadn't thought about it, and then a fairly large chunk, there is no verbal, it's just a verbal or handshake agreement. And then a few people do have reasonably detailed and very detailed agreements. So one thing that I wanted to talk about a little bit is, you might really want to think about having a written agreement, because at this time, again, with COVID, it kind of brings a lot of things to light that we hadn't thought about. Is what kind of protection do you have, or does the contract operator have in the case of something happening where they get impacted by the virus in some way? You know, does your agreement cover something like that? If it doesn't, you might want to think about it. You also might want to think about, you know, putting an agreement together, and you can type answers into the box. Again, we won't identify anything. If you know, don't have an agreement, you know, what kinds of things have you thought about? And just, you know, if you, you know, if you didn't have agreement, are you thinking about developing one? If you do have an agreement, what do you like about it, or how has it been working for you? So we have some answers coming in that they don't have contract operator, which some of you don't. Some of you won't have a contract operator. Somebody else wrote in that they don't have anything addressing COVID or anything similar. It is something to think about. And if you have any kind of legal assistance in your town, you might want to just call them and ask if they get impacted on the job by, you know, what their day-to-day working is. Are you going to have any issues? And somebody asked they'd like some suggestions on what should be included, and we can provide some of that information. One of our sister centers, the University of North Carolina, really does a lot of work on this area of how to write these agreements, what to include, and that sort of thing. So we are very happy to put you in touch with them and have them work with you on some language that you might include. Somebody else wrote in they don't have one, but they think during the COVID situation, it's a very good idea. And again, it's something I highly recommend. If you don't have one, maybe put one in place, because it could be something that helps you later on in case something happens. It's always better to think about it beforehand than worry about how to deal with it after. So let's move on to some more formal collaboration of merging systems together. So we're moving a little bit beyond just the immediate issues with the corona situation. So if there was a system you could merge with, either with your system being the one remaining or their system, would you want to do it? So the answers here are no, we're not interested in any circumstance. So no matter what, we really wouldn't want to have a merger situation. Maybe, yes, if we were the one remaining, yes, if they were the one remaining, meaning we want to get out of business, and yes, either way is fine.
Great, and we'll leave this poll open for a few more moments. And we'll get ready to close in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Okay, great. It says about 42% not interested in any circumstance, but we have another 42% that would possibly be interested. And then yes, if we were the one remaining is 8%, and yes, either way is fine is another 8%. Now our question is, or we want to talk about the fact that one benefit of merging systems is that fewer board members are needed if two or more systems are merged into one. So that's one thing to think about. I know that several of you wrote into the initial registration that you were having some issues with board members participating. You know, could you actually do some of this in the absence of board members? So there were some real concerns about board members, and we've heard many, many stories of just how hard it can be to get board members to get together and do anything. So you might want to think about that, is that the benefit of merging systems together is you need a lot fewer board members. So that's something to think about if that's an option for you, if you have a nearby system and you have, you know, a willingness to do that. There are organizations that can help, as Haley mentioned before. There's lots of people that can help you. If you're interested in this sort of thing, you know, let us know and we can either work with you directly or have others work with you to try to see if you can't form some kind of partnership to help you out. A couple questions along financial hardships, because I know some of you also indicated that there are some serious financial issues going on right now. So I have a couple things about finances. So since March, are your revenues higher than your expenses? So that means, are you bringing in more money than it costs you to run your system? So the answers here are not sure, no, our expenses are higher than our revenues. Expenses and revenues are about equal. Yes, our revenues are a little higher than expenses, and yes, our revenues are much higher than expenses. So take a moment and let us know how you're doing in the last couple months where, you know, we've been more in the shutdown mode.
And we'll leave this poll open for just a few more moments here. And we'll get ready to close in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
So not sure, 8%. Expenses higher than the revenue, 23%. Expenses revenue equal, about 46%. And revenues a little higher than expenses, 23%. This is kind of typical of what we're seeing right now. There has been a change over the last couple of months where it's been much harder with expenses and revenue and trying to get the revenue in. There's a lot of folks who are out of jobs and having a hard time paying. So it's kind of been fairly typical that we're seeing results like this. So another question is about shutoffs. This kind of relates to the whole question of the revenue. So if you use shutoffs before as a way to force payments, do you still practice shutoffs now? So many systems have used shutoffs as a way to kind of make sure people pay. Are you still practicing shutoffs? So you could say, yes, you have the same policy as before, you're continuing shutoffs. Yes, and if you don't shut off people before, you know, that would be the same policy. Yes, but only in very limited circumstances, you're still shutting people off. No, we've suspended shutoffs. No, we've turned on people previously shut off. So if somebody had been shut off and then not sure.
Great. And we'll leave this open for just a few moments. And getting ready to close in 3, 2, 1.
So it looks like about 33% have the same policies before. Another 42% has suspended shutoffs. 17% has suspended shutoffs and turned on people previously shut off. And then 8% not sure. So again, this is something that we've seen a lot across the country. Is there's been a big move to change to suspend shutoff policies because it's so important right now to have access to clean drinking water. So that's one of the reasons that we're seeing the revenue issue, is because we're choosing to suspend shutoffs and that sort of thing. So that ties together. And then another question, has the number of customers who are not able to pay gone up? So here's another poll. So, you know, you might not be sure if the number of customers who are not able to pay is going up or might have gone down. No, it's about the same as before. Yes, a little bit. Yes, a lot. So choose the answer that best fits.
And we'll leave this open for just a few more moments. And getting ready to close in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
So not sure, 14%, about the same as before, is half. So not a lot of difference, which is, that's a good thing actually. If you're not seeing the number of customers who can't pay going up, that's a good thing. So about 29% a little bit, and about 7% a lot. All right, so let's move on to just talk about a few effects on costs during this time. Things might be changing with personnel, chemicals, and materials. The volume of water you're treating right now might be different. Maybe some of your personnel are being laid off because you don't need them for, actions right now. That could be a problem. You might need more staff. So there could be things going up or down with personnel. You might have to pay more for chemicals or delivery at this time. There's customer service we just talked about. You might be reconnecting customers who were disconnected before, or you're not disconnecting customers. So there's all of those types of things. And then on the infrastructure front, you kind of have to keep things going there. If things break, that sort of thing, you really have to address those kinds of issues. So that cost is still going to continue. So we look at effects on revenues. So the last side was the cost side, the expense side. This side is the revenue side. So suspension of cutoffs, late fees, penalties, those types of things might affect your revenues. You might be extending payment plans to customers, which again will affect your revenues. The inability to pay might increase over time, depending on how the economy does. And then the water use might be changing. So commercial usage in most cases is decreasing across the country, and residential mostly is increasing. So that could be good or bad, depending on your makeup of whether you have commercial or residential customers. And I did want to point out one resource available to you for free. It's from our sister center at the University of North Carolina, and it's about customer assistance programs. So if you're looking into the potential for setting up a customer assistance program, or you want to see what's available, please, access this resource, and it can help you find ways to set up a customer assistance program. Other options for addressing, revenues and expenses at this time, managing your costs as best you can, tracking your revenue losses, again, as best you can. If there ever is a program in the federal government that could address this, it'd be really good to know what your revenue losses are, and look at your reserves if you have any, and make use of those reserves at this time. That's kind of why they're there. Typically you have an emergency reserve. Sometimes you have cash on hand. You want to have at least, many months worth of cash on hand. You might have to tap into some of that. If there's low interest loans, you can tap in to do that. Checking in with your funding programs and seeing if there's anything you can do to change your payment plan if that's an issue for you. Looking at your rates. And there might be some stimulus money for water utilities in the future. It's kind of been left out of past stimulus, but it is being talked a lot about the need to help water utilities at this time. So stay tuned on that. There was a couple of webinars that we've done on COVID-related water issues. Here's one in particular that relates to financial strategies. You're welcome to listen to that webinar and kind of get some more information about how this COVID might be affecting you at this time. And again, one of the reasons we bring up finances at in a webinar about collaboration is that that's one of the big reasons to join up with your neighbors, is you can reduce expenses by, getting a bigger entity instead of just you being alone. If you reach out to your neighbors and have, shared operations, shared management, shared finance, merge into one system, anything you can do to help you cut those costs would be really helpful at a time like this. So that's one of the reasons we brought up finances. And it also was an item that was mentioned a lot in the registration. So with that, I'll turn it back to Haley. I don't think we have any questions that have come in general, but if you have any, please type them in the question box. And I did want to mention that somebody pointed out that Ohio Rural Water does have some contract operations language on its website that can be downloaded. So in addition to the resources from the University of North Carolina EFC, you can also check out Ohio Rural Water. So Haley, was there anything you wanted to mention now?
Well, it looks like we don't have any questions. If you do have any questions, feel free to type them in now. We have about time to answer one of them. But if you think of any after you log off, please feel free to email us and we're happy to answer them ourselves or point you in the direction of somebody who can. And I just want to reiterate that we will be doing more webinars, not New Mexico specific, but that are free and available to the entire country. Again, if you go to our network website, which is efcnetwork.org, you can find most of the resources that we pointed out today and also sign up for additional webinars. Hang on, it looks like somebody sent a question. Please show the link for the customer assistance guide again. Can you go
Okay,
back
sure.
to that, Heather?
I would be glad to. There we go.
Okay, we can leave that up. And then another question, help finding a contract operator. I don't know if, Heather, you've ever helped with that, but I think the state could be of assistance with that.
Yeah, I think the two places to go there are the New Mexico Environment Department. They do try to maintain operators who are willing to work for others. So they would be one resource, and then the New Mexico Rural Water Association might be another resource. I think they kind of keep tabs on operators and try to help match up operators. So I think those would be the two best places to go to look for contract operators. And there are a few companies in New Mexico that provide contract operators in various parts of the state. So there are companies out there that you would, if you want to go that route, there are probably companies that you could find. So if you have trouble, if neither one of those options works for you, please contact us and we'll help you try to find somebody in your area who might be able to be a contract operator.
Great, thank you. And again, the slides and the recording of this webinar will be available in probably 1 to 2 weeks, and you will be getting an email with the certificate. So I think with that, we are good to go. We really appreciate all of you attending this webinar and your active participation. It really made it much better. So thank you, and I hope everyone has a great week.
Yeah, and please feel free to reach out to us if you need some help on anything related to this. We are here. As long as you're less than 10,000, we can provide some free assistance, so or help you connect up with somebody else who can. So please reach out to us if you have any needs in this area.
Thank you so much, Heather and Haley, for providing your expertise today. If there is no more last details at this moment, I just want to wish everybody a good afternoon.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Vanna.
Thank you. Have a great day, everyone.